Indeed, God is present here and now, and in the awareness of God's presence here and now. Let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks. We give thanks for this opportunity to celebrate those situations in our lives that lift us, that transform us. And we give thanks for the opportunity to hold in prayer those among us that have a need for this warm embrace. Our brothers and sisters in the Tree of Life Synagogue. Our brothers and sisters that have been the subject of bomb threats. Our brothers and sisters that have been on the receiving end of attacks of various sorts. Physical attacks, mental attacks, policy attacks. We see this opportunity to be a light in the world, to be a transformative agent. To be that which brings love, caring, compassion to those in need. We are the light of the world. We lift the bushel from over us so that we may radiate love, your love, in this moment. We give thanks that we are empowered to do so. We give thanks that we are willing to do so. And we give thanks that it is very apparent that we must do so. And for all of those in our experience who seem to have a need for this awareness, to have a need for this transmission of love, we hold them in consciousness and we see them lifted and transformed by the presence of your love in their life. For this we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. It's in every one of us. Boy, it's been a week. Sometimes it feels like the topics that I have chosen have demonstration of the need for the topic to be understood. And while I'm not claiming to have any kind of magical power in that regard, it just seems that there's so many opportunities to work with people who are in stress, in distress. Last week I shared with you this quote about the work that we are engaged in, transformational work that we are engaged in. And this came from a pair of ministers, one of which was a classmate of mine, who shared these ideas. Translational versus transformational teachings. Translational teachings are those intended to improve or translate a moment from a difficulty or a hardship to an opportunity or to something to leverage within the context of creating a more favorable experience. Translational teachings are focused on creating a more enhanced, confident, empowered, and authentic self-system. Translational teachings are ego-friendly insofar as they do not alter the ego's functional role in one's consciousness. Transformational teachings, on the other hand, seek to point us to a new reality that is only accessible within the context of a new identity. And my comment often through introspection and shadow work. Transformational teachings wreak havoc for the ego because their focus is not about survival of making things better. They point us away from the familiar and compel us to embrace the disowned and orphaned parts of ourselves. These teachings are more difficult to engage because our ego tends to undermine any intentional effort to explore our own interiors and face our own demons. And this is the ego being referenced here is the ego that A Course in Miracles describes as that aspect of consciousness which insists upon separation from each other and from God. And so as we consider the translational teachings versus the transformational teachings, the translational teachings are the stock in trade of unity ministries all across the country. And many of those ministries are also involved in transformational teaching. And the work that we're doing right now, this series that we're working on, is a transformational, a set of transformational teachings, because we're looking at the shadow, what Jung referred to as that aspect of our consciousness which we have chosen to ignore, to deny, and to forget. Ostensibly, to forget. The problem with our attempt to do that is that it is still there. It still calls upon us. And one of those situations of it calling happened to me this week. The kids were homesick. My son-in-law, for those of you who don't know, my daughter and her husband and 3 kids live downstairs. And so I have the blessing of a grandparent, or both Linda and I have the blessing of being grandparents that are present in the kids' lives a lot. Well, the a lot became too much this week in that 7 people in the house our size is pressing it. It's like we're not just a can of sardines, but we have been compressed before packaging. And so, you know, the old saying, place for everything and everything in its place. Well, that is not part of our common experience. My mom would never have anyone over without doing a thorough house cleaning. How many of you have parents like that? You know, I'm sorry you can't come over until we get this place cleaned up. Well, that approach, that habit, I'll say, was embedded deeply in me. And it actually became part of my shadow. And I'm guessing it was part of her shadow, and it was part of her mom's shadow, and it was part of her grandmother's shadow. And it had been handed down all the way from the time when we occupied caves, and our far distant ancestor would not allow anybody to come into the cave until all of the debris had been swept out. I'm just guessing. But nonetheless, it is a deep, deep part of my psyche that is based upon this idea that my worthiness is demonstrated by my cleanliness. You feel that? Have you have part of that as? Yeah. You're the only one, but I appreciate your honesty. Now, okay, all right. Okay, now we're starting to see that crowd act psychology. All right, so yes, we have these aspects of our shadow, some call it the dark side, that are ingrained in us from a very early age. And those aspects of our shadow stick around until we bring light to them. And that's what the transformational work is about, is bringing light to the shadow. And so to find a lost and lonely man, well, you know, that really talks about our interior quest as well, right? To find that lost and lonely aspect of self that we have shunted away. Debbie Ford, she wrote The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, 10 or 12 years ago. And much of the work that is going to be encountered over the course of the next several weeks is going to come from her work and from Robert Johnson's work, Owning Your Own Shadow. But Debbie Ford has this imagery that's, I think, quite appropriate. And she talks about us being born as a castle. We are an elegant castle when we come into this world. Well appointed, every room is unique, and every room has an aspect of our experience to be. But we have this room where it is our shouting room, right? It's our shouting room where we go into that room and we just scream our hearts out. And that screaming our hearts out feels good, right? You know, when you get to a point where you just want to let it go, one of the ways of letting it go is right? Well, so there's that room that is our shouting room. And early on, we are told, don't shout. My youngest granddaughter, Mackenzie, she has discovered her shouting room, and she likes to share that experience with all of us in the house. And her shouts are not just loud, but they are shrill. Right? Now, both Linda and I have hearing aids, and you might guess what effect that has on hearing aids. Those amplifiers, it's not like the head is cut off of that shrill scream. It is magnified and sent straight into our brains, not even bypassing the eardrums. So my comment to Mackenzie was, Mackenzie, don't shout. All right, what have I done? I have just declared to her that her shouting room is not a good place to be. So over the course of several times of my telling her, don't shout, she's going to close the door to her shouting room, and that no longer becomes part of her living space in her castle. And then there are the things about, for instance, straighten up your room, right? That usually comes at about 5 or 6 in our clan anyway, where the kids start to gain an appreciation for, and I put that in quotes, appreciation, for living in clean space. And that is really the place where my shadow formed many years ago. And that is that part of the castle, which is rough and tumble, everything is just thrown in there and there's no order to it at all. It's a great place to be when you just want to go and not worry about anything but just letting it all fly. That room gets closed off when we come to the point, or when we are told that our cleanliness demonstrates our worthiness. Then there is the part of the castle where we let go of our anger. We go into our anger room and we just express our anger. Psychologists tell us that it's important that we express rather than suppress our anger. And the challenge is to find a constructive way to express that anger. But nonetheless, if we're told that anger room is not a place that you should be, that you need to just suck it up, you need to, okay, so that anger room gets shut down. And what happens is that over our lives, and this typically is as we're growing up, we've gotten influence from our parents, we've got influence from our siblings, we've got influence from our friends, from our teachers, we've got influence from the government, we've got influence coming in to tell us this is good, that's bad. And that then shuts off rooms in our castle, and we end up having most of our castle boarded up, and we're living in just 2 or 3 rooms down in the basement. Well, our process of transformation is to open those doors, to open the door of our anger room, to open the door of our messy room, to open the door, and so on, to retrieve the entire castle for us. So, our process of processing the shadow is about moving or integrating all of these rooms in our castle, to open them up, to make them accessible, to feel free to live in the whole space. So we're striving for integration. Debbie Ford offers us this. She says, our shadows hold the essence of who we are. They hold our most treasured gifts. By facing these aspects of ourselves, we become free to experience our glorious totality, the good and the bad, the dark and the light. It is by embracing all of who we are that we earn the freedom to choose what we do in the world. As long as we keep hiding, masquerading, and projecting what is inside us, we have no freedom to be and no freedom to choose. When we're living in those 2 rooms in the basement instead of living in this glorious castle with every room accessible, we are limiting ourselves. Now, this is not to say that we don't have the responsibility to positively channel these experiences, right? We just can't let it all hang out, because that is not socially acceptable. Take a look at what's happened here recently. We have a dude that felt that certain political leaders were not in compliance with what he felt was concert of ideas with the president, so he decided to ship bombs to these various leaders. What has that done? That has certainly demonstrated his lack of transformation, but nonetheless, it has also infused in the political leadership a fear that their decisions are going to come home to roost in a very negative way. That has adverse consequences for our society as a whole. We need our political leaders to certainly respond to the needs of the constituents. I mean, they are our employees. But at the same time, there are difficult decisions that need to be made, and they are the ones that are charged with the responsibility of looking at all aspects of a decision and coming to a conclusion. And if we, as the uneducated populace who have chosen not to involve ourselves in the nuances of that policy making process, we may in fact have strong disagreement. Even if we are aware of that, we may have strong disagreement. But nonetheless, it is important that our leaders have the opportunity to make decisions that are sometimes tough. Well, so the process of opening the rooms in our castle is not about getting rid of things we dislike in ourselves, but about finding the positive sides of these aspects and integrating it into our lives. Mackenzie, don't shout. Well, that might be, that might become part of the shadow that I need to keep my voice low all times. And so that aspect of raising my voice, of being empowered by that vocal expression, becomes, or the lack of that being part of our shadow. We need to look at it and say, okay, what is the positive aspect of shouting? What's the positive aspect of shouting? To be heard, yeah.
Letting out your frustration.
Letting out frustration. I'm sorry?
Getting attention.
Getting attention.
Feels
Yeah. Yeah, if we are in a precarious situation, we've just fallen off a cliff, we grabbed a tree limb on the way, or a branch on the way down, and we need to get somebody's attention, shouting is a good thing, right? You can't get up over the edge audibly just by whispering. So it's about finding the positive aspects of those things that we have shoved into our shadow. That is part of this transformation process. But it's also about making peace with ourselves, because the presence of the shadow in our consciousness is creating a war within our consciousness, right? It's creating a conflict. I can't do that because of, what my mom taught me, right? I can't have anybody over because the house is messy. Well, trying to live our lives in this conflict zone is very difficult, very stressful, and that can be extremely unhealthy. So this Debbie offers us this, that your life will be transformed when you make peace with your shadow. The caterpillar will become a breathtakingly beautiful butterfly. You will no longer have to pretend to be someone you're not. You will no longer have to prove you're good enough. When you embrace your shadow, you will no longer have to live in fear. Find the gifts of your shadow, and you will finally revel in all of the glory of your true self. Then you will have the freedom to create the life you have always desired. This is transformational teaching. This is going to go against the ego. The ego is going to say, oh, well, no, wait a minute. I mean, we're separate from each other. We're separate from God, and we need to keep it that way. Fear is one of the primary tools that the ego uses to prove that that is so. Abolishing, or dissolving, I should say, dissolving fear with this unconditional love, with this living in the experience of unconditional love, is a transformative process. Getting rid of that fear, moving us out of a conflict zone into a zone of appreciation of all aspects of ourselves, even those aspects that are in our shadow. So, the interesting thing about this is that in our process of accepting ourselves, we forgive ourselves, and we automatically accept and forgive others. I think that if Jesus were alive today, he would be a Jungian psychologist, because what he said in Matthew 7:1-5 said, "Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get." Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye when you do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. I think that the log that he's referring to here is actually the shadow. He's referring to the shadow. He's saying, dig into your shadow, transform your shadow. And then when you transform your shadow, what you will do is you will forgive yourself. And when you forgive yourself, you will accept yourself. And when you accept yourself, you will accept others. And in accepting others, you will forgive others. So it is a forgive myself, accept others, and forgive others. And that process is one that's demonstrated or talked about in this passage. It is a process of our transforming every aspect of ourselves. It's a process of integrating every aspect of ourselves. And so we come to this, that we live under the impression that in order for things to be divine, it has to be perfect. We are mistaken. In fact, the exact opposite is true. To be divine is to be whole, and to be whole is to be everything, the positive and the negative, the good and the bad, the holy man and the devil. When we take the time to discover our shadow and the gifts, we will understand what Jung meant by the gold is in the dark. Each of us needs to find that gold in order to reunite with our sacred self. This is the sacred marriage. This is the integration of those aspects that we have shunted aside with those aspects that we have celebrated. And we bring these two together as the yin and the yang, to integrate as the Tai Chi shows the integration of the whole. The black and the white and the black, the transformative and the transparent versus the obscuring and the resisting. We are whole people. We are divine beings, and we are divine in our wholeness, not in our perfection. So let us strive for the integration of the wholeness rather than the perfection of this characteristic and that characteristic and this aspect of self and that aspect of self. Let us strive for wholeness rather than perfection. We'll have our meditation. And I'm going to share with you a meditation that Debbie shares in her book. And you will find in your notes page, you'll find the several questions that I'm going to ask. Now, we're going to do this in 6 or 7 minutes. But I put those questions in there. She suggested, and this is a good practice anytime you do a meditation with interaction like this, is to record those questions in your own voice so that you can go through your meditation by listening to the questions rather than having to come out of your meditation and read the questions. So the process would be to record these questions with ample time between the questions so that you can sit in meditation, listen to the audio, including the questions, and then without having to come out of your meditation, you can gain fluidity, flow in your meditation. So I'm going to offer this meditation, and she recommends that you set aside an hour or so for this. And if that's the case, your several questions might have 6 or 7 minutes between them. But we'll do this in 6 or 7 minutes instead of an hour. Yeah, cast all our cares. An image that Debbie Ford uses is, imagine yourself going onto an elevator. As you step into the elevator, you take several deep breaths. Breathing in for 5 seconds, holding for a few seconds, and breathing out for 5 seconds. Holding for a few seconds, then breathing in for 5 seconds. So using this 5-second phase of breath, we take several breaths. And as we breathe, we press the down button. We're moving from our conscious mind into our subconscious mind. We breathe in and we breathe out. As we move deeper, more relaxed, breathing in and breathing out. After our several extended breaths, we feel the elevator come to a stop. The doors open. And we come out into this beautiful garden. Here in our subconscious, we have this beautiful landscape. Noticing all of the flowers and the trees and the plants. Noticing the color of the sky. We walk into this garden and we find this area with a comfortable bench. We're drawn to sit, to rest. And we notice that we are facing an area in front of us that is shimmering. Like you would see radiation from the sand on a hot day. And in this area of shimmer, we realize that within that holds all the possibilities of our life. All of the opportunities, all of the obstacles. And as we sit, considering this shimmering space, a question is voiced. What am I most afraid of? Knowing that in this safe space, any answer is acceptable. What am I most afraid of? Physically, mentally, emotionally. What am I most afraid of? And then another question is asked. What aspects of my life need transforming? We allow ourselves to offer any answer to this. There is no correct answer to any of these questions. The only correct response is the honest response. And we acknowledge that our honest response today may be different than our honest response tomorrow. And that is perfectly okay. What do I want to accomplish by exploring my shadow? Resting in this quiet space, noticing this shimmering space in front of us. What am I striving to accomplish by exploring my shadow? And then comes, what am I most afraid of that someone else will find out about me? What am I most afraid of that someone else will find out about me? most afraid of in finding out about myself? What am I most afraid of in finding out about myself? And then what is the biggest lie I've ever told myself? What is the biggest lie I've ever told about myself? Or I've ever told myself? And then what is the biggest lie I've told to someone else? What is the biggest lie I've told to someone else? And what could stop me from doing the work necessary to transform my life? What could stop me from doing the work necessary to transform my life? Sitting in this quiet space, hearing these answers that today seem to be true. We're identifying layers and objects within our shadow that are true today. As we identify these aspects of the rejected self, the denied self, the forgotten self, these are the objects of our transformation. Look for the positive in these answers. Look for the motivation behind these answers. Look for the causes of the motivation underlying these answers. And we begin the process of resculpting our consciousness, of integrating our consciousness, of bringing into wholeness our consciousness, of transforming us to the divine beings in our awareness that we really are. One by one, we open the doors of the rooms of our castle. One by one, we integrate. We heal. One by one, we realize the blessings in every aspect of our psyche. And we are blessed. this time, into this space, we come back with this reality of who we are to a greater realization than we have had in a long, long time. And in this, we celebrate with hallelujah